Somebody might want to buy the Rolls-Royce of health insurance coverage. Someone else might want to buy the Volkswagen of health insurance coverage. Why is it that we don't have that kind of choice as Americans today?
Well, mostly it's because of the state regulations on health insurance that mandate that you have to have certain policies that some people don't want. Because there isn't a range of possibilities, there's only like a one-size-fits-all. Usually it's the Cadillac, which no one can afford. I know when I lived in Kentucky, there was a problem there because when I moved there were only 2 health insurers. By the time I left a few years later, there was only 1. The health insurers are being put out of business because they cannot offer different plans for different people, and so it's usually only one that survives. And this is horrible because it's like, would we all want to get the same size shoe? Of course not. Some of us would be pinched. Others would have the shoe falling off, and we have different needs. Early in life, you don't need things like, chronic disease treatment so much, but you surely do need help for pregnancy and other types of things that you might have as a young family. And, of course, as you get older, you don't need the pregnancy clause if you're in menopause, for example, but you may need to have more treatment for chronic disease. So, at different times in our life even, we need different coverage.
We are chatting with Dr. Mary Ruwart, who is a former contender for the 1992 Libertarian Party vice presidential nomination and who is the author of the great book, Healing Our World, The Other Piece of the Puzzle. So yet again, Dr. Ruwart, we have an example. Amtrak, you can't compete with it, take it or leave it. Post office for first-class mail, you can't compete with it, take it or leave it. Tennessee Valley Authority, I'm not picking on our friends in that part of the country because they're victims. Take the federal government's electrical power or leave it. Will we reach a time period where the public health insurance, whether it's a Medicare-type program or not, will drive out, just like the example you told us about Kentucky, the private health insurers? Because let's face it, you can't really compete with the government when it has a bottomless pit with which to subsidize its patrons, and that bottomless pit is called tax dollars.
Well, that's right, but there's something even worse than that that's happened in Canada. Canadians cannot, in many provinces, get the services that they need. For example, we were talking about a cardiac bypass. They cannot go and get it privately in Canada. They have to actually come to the United States or another country to get it because it's forbidden by law for the procedures that are covered by universal health care in Canada.
All right, let me just stop you here. How is it that a government of politicians or bureaucrats or both could prohibit a perfectly valid, life-saving medical procedure which is beyond the competence of politicians and bureaucrats to comprehend?
Well, they think they can. In fact, there's charts being drawn up for the Obama administration, not too dissimilar to what the Oregon State group has drawn up, where they have made a list of what procedures are acceptable and which ones aren't. And by acceptable, I mean they're ranking them by numbers. And if the number isn't high enough, you just don't get that treatment.
Well, how could the Canadian people permit their government to prohibit a procedure that in America is so common? You know the numbers better than I. I'm sure it saves tens of thousands of lives every year. And today they can do it without even cutting open the chest. Today they can do it and you're up walking in 2 days.
Well, that's right. And unfortunately in Canada, it's just the way it is. People don't know. That's the problem. I know because I'm in the medical profession, so I understand when the doctor tells me, gee, there's nothing to do, you just have to go home and die. If I hear that from a relative, I usually know whether that's true or not, but most people don't. And it's only if they investigate a little further and call their friends in the United States or actually do some research that they might find out that it's possible to get it here.
Is this a problem that is impossible for us to get our way out of? I mean, in order to undo the mess that we're in now, wouldn't one have to change the laws not only of the federal government but of all 50 states? Now, I live in the most overtaxed, overregulated state in the union. I know there's a couple of states that claim that, but New Jersey really is the most overregulated, overtaxed state in the union, where, as you've indicated, Dr. Ruwart, insurance carriers are required to offer, even to people like me, procedures that I couldn't possibly, biologically, by virtue of my age or gender or lifestyle, have need for. So here's the question. Don't we have to change 51 sets of laws, the federal laws and the laws in all 50 states, in order to bring us to a true free market?
Possibly not. You know, one of the things that our founders considered was putting as part of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution a plank on medical freedom, which would allow people to buy the service they want without restriction from the government. If we had something like that in place, it may actually wipe out not only the federal laws that prohibit competition, but the state laws as well.
What is the advice that you give to so many of our viewers who say to me, particularly on this 4th of July time in our lives, when we used to celebrate freedom, and now we just seem to be talking about the government is doing this, the government is doing that. What do you say to all those good folks that email me and some of my colleagues here every day and ask, what can I do? What can I do to reclaim freedom for me, my spouse, my family, my town, my state?
Well, the thing that everyone has to do is get involved. And depending on your talents and interests, that involvement may look very different from person to person. As you know, I do a lot of writing and speaking. I have a lot of activism. I run as a libertarian candidate. Now, for some people, that might not be their way. Maybe they'd like to pass out flyers for the candidate of their choice. You know, maybe they would like to talk to their neighbors. You know, that is so effective. If you educate yourself and just have conversations with your neighbors, it's incredible how much you can change their attitudes and change the world, because people listen to people that they know. So there's many, many things, but everybody has got to find their niche. It's different for everybody, but that's exciting too, because again, it's the marketplace at work. You know, we each take the marketplace position that we want in fighting for freedom, but we have to get involved. We cannot sit back, because that is why our regulators have been able to do the things that they do to us. And again, they're not bad people oftentimes. Sometimes they think they're doing well, but that's why we educate ourselves, so that we can educate them. And once everybody understands that these things hurt everybody, then things will change.
Dr. Mary Ruwart, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us, and a happy 4th of July to you and your family.
Well, thank you, and I wish the same to you and your listeners.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It really is an insidious problem that we face today, which is the attitude among so many of our fellow citizens that the government knows best and the government will take care of this for us. I've often liked to argue, as many of you know, that after the right to live, after the right to life, the greatest of the rights that we enjoy is the right to be left alone. And the government, of course, rejects that right, because the government believes that it knows what's better for us than what we know is good for ourselves. And so we have a government that, not in one fell swoop and not overnight and not with the stroke of a pen, but slowly, inexorably, and insidiously takes away our loss of liberties. Justice Felix Frankfurter once said, the loss of liberty rarely comes overnight. It usually comes because of well-intended people and the unintended consequences of their use and abuse of the government to interfere in our lives. Someone who has championed pointing out and exposing the use and abuse of the government is my next guest, Jim Babka, who's the head of a very interesting group called Downsize DC. There's a challenge for you, Jim.
You can say I have job security, right?
Yeah. Well, welcome here. Welcome to Freedom Watch.
Well, I'm very, very thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you. Tell us about Downsize DC and what it is you folks are doing to try and point out to the rest of the country how monster government is getting away with writing laws upon laws upon laws.
So DownsizeDC.org is a citizen organization, and its primary purpose is to organize people in a way that maybe they've never been organized before. We're trying to harness the power of the Internet. We've given people a lobbying mechanism whereby they can come on to a website for free, type in their basic contact information. The system then sets them up so they can send a personalized message to their representative and to senators. And they're not doing this action alone. They're not doing it randomly. They're joined with thousands of other people each time they're doing it. And our goal is to build an army so large that Congress cannot afford to ignore us. We believe that it's our job to give our congressional employees, our so-called representatives, their